In China, the status of a man was once measured by the number of women he had, both wives and concubines. In 1949, the communists banned the practice, seeing it as a sign of bourgeois decadence. But now, after 2 decades of market economy, concubines have returned, the ernai, meaning second wife. These young women are just captives in a golden cage. There are approximately 100,000 kept women in Guangdong province alone. The tradition of the concubine may be the subject of many a male fantasy, but for the young girls, it means living in seclusion, waiting on and for the man, in a state of total dependence. The life of a girl has never been easy in China. Most of China had adapted to Confucius teachings in Imperial era. The idea of Confucianism is philosophically based and caters to the behaviors of everyday living. The Confucian code of ethics severely repressed women, so they were not individuals but simply an accessory for men to abuse and use. It revolved around the belief that a man was the leader and a woman's priority was to be obedient to that man. Confucianism led women to be subdued to the point of brutality. It was a harsh fate to be born a female in China. A child's life was determined before they were conceived and in accordance to their social status. Parents were in charge of their children's marriage and had ultimate authority. If a woman or girl refused to marry, it was likely she would be forced to be a low-class concubine or prostitute. Women were not allowed to have conversations with men. They had little chance, as they were confined to their home and the courtyard. They were kept in a separate part of the home with any children that had been born. If a woman conceived too many girls, she left them somewhere to die. This was common because females were a burden to their parents. They were unable to farm well, do demanding work to help the family survive, or fight in a war effectively. They were unable to farm well, do demanding work to help the family survive, or fight in a war effectively. A woman's sole duty was to serve her biological function to have sons and continue her husband's bloodline. The perception of female beauty during the Ming Dynasty revolved around the size of her feet. Foot binding became a highly practiced procedure within the elite class. Foot binding or hobbling is the process of inhibiting a girl's feet to grow. A child's mother or grandmother would start by pulling the toes back, thereby breaking her toes with the exception of the big toe, and then tightly wrapping her toes underneath the bottom of her foot. The purpose of the wrappings was to break the bones in the girl's feet. This almost completely restricted any movement for the females, and were forced to sit at home taking care of domestic work by default. The ideal size of an adult female's feet was supposed to be 3 inches long. Every girl in Imperial China had to undergo the cruel treatment just to serve the foot fetish of the Chinese men. A prospective husband could deny a girl whose feet were too long. They were forced to lift their dresses to show how beautiful their feet were, and it was acceptable for the man to end all connections if he was displeased. Concubines were women who were married to men as secondary wives, whose purpose was to produce sons for their husband. Young girls were often sold by their parents either to brokers or to the intended master to acquire money because of their poverty. Buying girls as concubines was appropriate and acceptable behavior in China because they believed in polygamy and status. This was accepted because the men could afford many wives and should increase the number of children born into their bloodline. This showed that they were worthy men. The first wife may encourage her husband to buy concubines if she was unable to have children. When the concubine gives birth, the first wife would want to adopt the child and raise it as her own. A concubine was never able to become the first wife of her master, even if the primary wife died. She had no power or status in her life, but she was taken care of financially, which was a relief for most considering the poverty they were born into. A concubine was a married woman whose sole purpose was to bear male children. All girls living in the Forbidden City were carefully secluded in the imperial quarters deep inside the palace. They were restricted to the inner court and forbidden from venturing out of their quarters. The concubines who gave birth to male children were elevated to imperial consorts, with the empress at the top of the hierarchy in the emperor's harem. There was an official system for selecting concubines to join the emperor's harem. The selection process would take place inside the Forbidden City every 3 years. Girls were selected as xiunu or elegant females for the court by a league of eunuchs traveling all over China, and the selection criteria ranged from emperor to emperor. Candidates ranged from 13 to 17 years of age and were chosen based on their background, virtues, behavior, character, appearance, and body condition. Most Chinese emperors perversely and obsessively chose younger girls, even as young as 12 years old. The cruelty of the Ming emperors knew no bounds and was specifically targeted towards the imperial concubines, who were considered as the emperor's private property. Some Ming emperors had more than about 9,000 concubines, many of whom had been kidnapped from their homes and were forbidden to leave their gilded prison except when they were called to the emperor's bed. Since the barbaric practice of foot binding was prominent at this time, the hobbled women could not run away or even walk into the emperor's bedchambers, but instead had to be carried naked to the expectant man. The emperors, with a huge number of women at their beck and call, were drowned in their obsessive perverse desires. Behind closed doors, they kept the concubines confined and subjected them to torture and controlled every aspect of their lives. In order to continue to control them even after their death, the emperors started the tradition whereby concubines would be killed, forced to commit suicide, or were buried alive alongside the dead emperor. It was certainly a dangerous place to a girl in Imperial China. The perverse desires of the emperors drove them into a life of debauchery and sin while neglecting the throne and their duties. As a result, throughout most of history, Imperial China had been ruled by the League of Eunuchs, controlling the government in the absence of the emperor. Stay tuned to find out more about how the eunuchs rose to immense power in Imperial China, liberating the people from the shackles of history. This is Time Capsule. Please like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss out. Thank you for watching. See you again next time on Time Capsule.